The sea. For centuries, it has been a source of legend, a realm of discovery, and a grave for secrets. It promises unimaginable riches to those brave enough to seek them and a cold, indifferent oblivion to those who fail. But what happens when the vast, empty ocean becomes a cage? What if the greatest danger is not in the crushing depths below, but in the man standing right beside you on the bridge? In today's story, we board a vessel of hope that became a floating tomb. We'll follow the trail of a seasoned captain obsessed with a legendary prize, his loyal first mate who shared his dream, and a discovery so valuable it turned partners into predators. This is the story of a bloody mutiny, not on the high seas with cannons and cutlasses, but in the cold steel confines of a modern salvage ship, a mutiny fueled by the oldest and most powerful motives of all, treasure and greed. Before we weigh anchor and dive into these dark and treacherous waters, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss a single one of the deep-sea mysteries we dredge up each and every week. Now, brace yourselves as we cast off into the chilling final voyage of the Neptune's Folly. The sound of the foghorn fades, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against a pier, the cry of gulls, and the low thrum of a ship's generator. The Neptune's Folly was not a pretty ship. She was a workhorse, a 70-meter salvage vessel whose hull was a patchwork of rust stains, faded paint, and the scars of 100 hard voyages. She sat low in the water at the industrial end of the city's port, looking tired and sullen under the gray, overcast morning sky. But to those in the know, the ship was a legend, as was her captain. For 3 decades, Captain Alistair Graves had been the best deep-water recovery specialist on the coast. He was a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in every dive bar and maritime office from Panama to Alaska, man who could find things the ocean had swallowed whole. His final voyage, a grueling 3-month expedition into a notoriously treacherous stretch of the North Pacific, had been shrouded in his typical obsessive secrecy. When the Neptune's Folly had limped back into port just after dawn, there was no fanfare, only the quiet, efficient work of tying off at the dock. The silence that followed was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. It was Elias Eli Vance, the first mate, who made the call. His voice, broadcast over the Port Authority's radio channel, was a ragged, strangled thing, almost unrecognizable from his usual calm, professional cadence. Port Authority, this is the Neptune's Folly. We have a medical emergency on the bridge. I think the captain is dead. The medical emergency was a grotesque understatement. When the first port police officers boarded the vessel, they found a scene of shocking, intimate violence. The bridge of the Neptune's Folly was Captain Graves' sanctuary, a place of meticulous order, where every chart was stowed and every instrument gleamed. Now that order was violated. Captain Graves, a formidable man of 60 with a weathered face and a beard the color of sea salt, was slumped in his high-backed captain's chair. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the forward viewport, as if still scanning a horizon only he could see. His khaki shirt was soaked through with a dark, sticky crimson. Protruding from his chest, just below his ribs, was the handle of a heavy, professional-grade fishing knife, the kind used for gutting massive tuna. The blade had been driven in with such force that only the thick, rubberized grip was visible. The deck around the chair was a slick, horrifying pool of blood. Detective Isabella Izzy Rossi and her partner, Detective Marcus Thorne, arrived as the ME was beginning his grim work. The air on the bridge was thick with the coppery smell of blood and the faint, briny scent of the sea. Thorne, a veteran homicide detective with a stomach hardened by years of such scenes, took one look and his jaw tightened. Rossi, younger and more attuned to the emotional atmosphere of a crime scene, felt a profound sense of violation. This wasn't just a murder. It was a dethronement. They were met on the main deck by a small, huddled group. The crew. There were 4 of them. First mate Eli Vance stood slightly apart, his face pale and ashen. His usual confident posture collapsed. He was a capable-looking man in his late 30s, with a lean, wiry build and the sharp, intelligent eyes of a natural leader. He was Graves' hand-picked protégé, his second-in-command for the last 5 years. I don't understand, Vance stammered, running a hand through his disheveled black hair. I was the last one to see him, around 0200 hours. We were finishing the final approach logs. He was fine, a little tired, but fine. He told me to get some rack time, said he'd take the final watch himself. I went to my cabin. When I woke up for the docking procedure at 0600, I came up to the bridge and I found him like that. The rest of the crew were a motley collection of sea-hardened professionals. There was Silas Croft, the ship's engineer, a man in his 50s who seemed more machine than human. His face perpetually smudged with grease, his voice a low, rumbling monosyllable. There was Jenna O'Malley, the sonar and tech specialist, a sharp, quick-witted woman in her early 30s whose fiery red hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail. And there was Big Mike Torres, the lead diver and deck boss, a mountain of a man with tattoos covering every inch of his visible skin, his expression currently a mixture of shock and sullen fear. The ship was locked down for final approach, Vance continued, his voice gaining a bit of its usual authority as he focused on the procedure. Standard protocol in port waters. No one on, no one off. The only people on this vessel for the last 3 months have been the 5 of us. The implication was clear and chilling. The killer wasn't some unknown assailant who had snuck aboard in the dark. The killer was standing right there on the deck with them. The Neptune's Folly had returned to port not just as a ship, but as a sealed crime scene with a victim and 4 suspects. The initial interviews took place in the ship's cramped mess hall, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and rising tension. Each crew member was questioned separately, and their stories on the surface were perfectly aligned. After Vance had left the bridge at 0200, they were all in their cabins, asleep. No one heard anything, no one saw anything. The skipper was a hard man, Mike Torres grunted when Thorne pressed him about his relationship with Graves. Pushed us to the limit, but he was the best. Fair. The shares were always fair. He was obsessed on this last trip, Jenna O'Malley offered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. More than usual, poring over old charts, yelling at the sonar readouts. He was chasing something big. What was he chasing? Rossi asked. Jenna shrugged, her eyes evasive. He never told us. Not the specifics. He called it the prize. Said it would be the one that would let us all retire. Silas Croft, the engineer, was even less forthcoming. My job is the engines, he rumbled. They run. Captain steers the boat. I stay below. Didn't see him much. Eli Vance, as the first mate, was the most articulate. He painted a picture of a brilliant, driven mentor who was on the verge of his greatest discovery. He was chasing a ghost, Vance said, his voice laced with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. A legend, the Santa Cruz, a Spanish treasure galleon that went down in a typhoon in 1742, loaded with Inca gold from the New World. Most people think it's a myth. Alistair believed he'd found it. This trip, this was it. He was certain. A legendary treasure. The motive, vast and shimmering, had just been dropped onto the table. Greed. A motive as old as the sea itself. But the physical evidence was confounding. The forensics team swept the ship from bow to stern. The murder weapon was a standard-issue fishing knife from the ship's galley. Dozens of them were on board. There were no usable fingerprints on the handle, only smudges consistent with the killer wearing gloves. There were no foreign footprints, no signs of a struggle on the bridge other than the blood. The killer had been swift, brutal, and clean. This is a locked room mystery on a floating piece of rust, Thorne grumbled to Rossi as they stood on the dock, watching the setting sun paint the sky in hues of orange and blood red. For suspects, one victim, and a ghost story about Spanish gold. Everyone has the same alibi and everyone has the same motive. This is a nightmare. Rossi was staring at the ship, her mind turning over the details. Vance said he left the captain at 0200. The ME puts the time of death between 0300 and 0400. That's a 1-hour window, and Vance was the only one who officially saw him alive last. His word is the only thing establishing that initial timeline. You don't trust the Golden Boy? Thorne asked. I don't trust anyone who's that composed after finding his mentor with a knife in his chest, Rossi replied. He was shocked, yes, but he was also controlled, like he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. That night, Rossi did what she did best. She went digital. She got a warrant for the personal laptops and hard drives of the entire crew, including the captain. On Graves' computer, she found a treasure trove of research. He had spent the better part of a decade on the Santa Cruz. He had cross-referenced historical shipping manifests, weather patterns from the 18th century, and obscure maritime journals. He had purchased highly classified deep-sea sonar maps at a black market auction. His obsession was laid bare in thousands of files. And in a password-protected folder labeled Eureka, she found a series of sonar images. They were grainy, but unmistakable. It was the outline of a massive, ancient shipwreck, lying in a deep, uncharted oceanic trench. And a final, triumphant log entry, dated just 2 days before they returned to port. Log entry 72. Solved it. The final piece of the puzzle. She's there. Just where the old stories said she'd be if you knew how to listen. The prize is ours. Final coordinates locked. We'll begin recovery planning upon return to port. This one is for the history books. He had found it. The ghost was real. And so was the gold. The motive wasn't a potential. It was a reality. Then Rossi moved on to the cruise devices. Silas Croft's laptop was all engine schematics and engineering forums. Mike Torres's was full of online poker sites and emails to an ex-wife demanding money. Jenna O'Malley's had sophisticated sonar imaging software and a half-finished application for a PhD program in oceanography. And then there was Eli Vance's laptop. It was clean, almost too clean. His search history was professional, his emails were mundane. But Rossi was a deep diver. She ran a file recovery program on the hard drive's free space. And there, in the digital graveyard of deleted files, she found the ghost. It was a series of search queries all made over the last 6 months, from encrypted browsers. Searches for Santa Cruz legend, market value of Spanish doubloons, extradition laws for maritime salvage, and, most chillingly, undetectable poisons, and how to bypass a ship's VMS tracker. The loyal protege, the grieving second-in-command, had been doing his own research. He hadn't just been following his captain's dream. He had been planning to steal it. The puzzle was far from solved, but a critical piece had just slammed into place. The face of the killer was beginning to resolve from the murky depths, and it was the face everyone, including the victim, had trusted the most. The discovery on Eli Vance's hard drive was the anchor point the investigation desperately needed. The digital ghosts of his searches painted a damning picture of premeditation, a mind secretly plotting while his hands were carrying out the captain's orders. But a deleted search history, however suspicious, wasn't enough to secure a murder charge. It was intent, not action. Rossi and Thorne knew they needed to connect Eli's secret ambitions to the physical reality of the crime. They needed a timeline, a weapon, and a crack in the unified story of the crew. Their strategy shifted. They would treat Eli as their prime suspect but keep that suspicion under wraps, allowing him the space to believe he was still seen as a grieving colleague. They would use that space to apply pressure to the other crew members, to see if the bonds forged at sea were strong enough to withstand the scrutiny of a murder investigation on dry land. Thorne, with his years of experience reading people, decided to focus on the 2 crew members he saw as potential weak links. The money-troubled diver, Mike Torres, and the ambitious tech, Jenna O'Malley. He brought in Big Mike for a second interview, not in the formal setting of the precinct, but in a neutral, run-down coffee shop near the docks. "Look, Mike," Thorne began, his tone conspiratorial. "We know Graves found something big out there, something that would make everyone on that boat rich. But a funny thing happens when there's that much money on the line. People get greedy. Shares change." Torres, who had been sullen and uncommunicative, suddenly looked interested. "The skipper was always straight with the shares," he grunted, though his eyes darted away as he spoke. "Was he?" Thorne pressed. "Because we've been looking at his logs. He was planning on logging this find by the book. That means the company, the insurers, the government, They all get their cut before the crew sees a dime. A treasure like that, by the book, could mean the difference between you getting $10 million and you getting maybe one. If you're lucky. A flicker of anger crossed the big diver's face. That ain't right. We were the ones out there, bustin' our asses for 3 months. My point exactly, Thorne said, leaning back. Maybe someone else on that boat felt the same way. Maybe someone suggested that if the captain wasn't around to file the official report, the crew could file their own. A report that left a few things out. A finder's fee, taken before the suits ever get their hands on it. Torres was silent, but his massive hands were clenched into fists on the tabletop. Thorne hadn't gotten a confession, but he had planted a seed of doubt and confirmed a critical point of tension. The division of the spoils. Rossi's approach with Jenna O'Malley was different. She met her at the university library, appealing to her identity as a scientist, not a suspect. Jenna, your work is incredible, Rossi said, gesturing to the complex sonar imaging textbooks Jenna had been studying. You're the only one who could truly understand what Captain Graves found, the only one who could interpret that data. He must have relied on you completely. Jenna's guard, which had been up, lowered slightly. He was a genius with the old lore, she admitted. But he needed me to make the tech work. His methods were unorthodox. He was running a parallel set of sonar scans, off the official record. Encrypted. Only he and I had the key. And what did those scans show? Rossi asked gently. Jenna hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. They showed he was right. It's down there. A galleon, massive, mostly intact, under a silt deposit in the Cascadia Basin. It's the find of the century. A find like that could change your career, Rossi mused. It could fund your PhD, your own lab, for the rest of your life. But if it's logged as a Graves maritime discovery, it's his name on the papers, not yours. I don't care about the fame, Jenna said, her voice sharp. I care about the science. But Rossi detected a note of defensiveness, the sound of someone trying to convince themselves as much as her. While they were working the crew, a new, complicating factor emerged. A high-powered lawyer representing a rival salvage company, Odyssey Marine, made a formal inquiry about the investigation. Odyssey Marine, run by a ruthless corporate raider type named Julian Croft, was known for its aggressive tactics and its fleet of state-of-the-art ships. My client has reason to believe that Captain Graves was operating in a sector for which Odyssey has exclusive survey rights, the lawyer stated. We are prepared to file a legal claim on any and all salvage from his last voyage. This introduced a powerful red herring. Could a team from Odyssey have somehow intercepted the Neptune's Folly at sea? Could they have boarded the ship, killed Graves to get the coordinates, and slipped away undetected? It was a long shot, but it provided a compelling alternative to the locked room scenario. Thorne decided to pay a visit to Julian Croft. Croft's office was the antithesis of the Neptune's Folly, sleek, top-floor suite with panoramic views of the harbor, all chrome and black leather. Croft himself was smooth, tanned, and radiated an aura of expensive, predatory charm. Alistair Graves was a dinosaur, Croft said with a dismissive wave of his hand. An analog man in a digital world. But I respected him. He was a true believer. This talk of us being involved is absurd. My ships have VMS trackers that are monitored by the second. We can account for every nautical mile we've traveled. We were nowhere near Graves' last known position. He was smooth, plausible, and his alibi seemed ironclad. But the encounter left Thorne with a nagging feeling. Croft was too eager to dismiss Graves, too quick to distance himself. The investigation felt like it was being pulled in two directions. Was the killer on the ship, or was there an external enemy they hadn't considered? The key, Rossi believed, lay in the ship's own data. She requested a full forensic analysis of the ship's navigation and communication systems. The tech assigned to the case was a young Coast Guard prodigy who specialized in maritime data. After 2 days closeted with the ship's black boxes, he called Rossi with a discovery. This is weird, the tech said. The ship's VMS, the vessel monitoring system, is clean. It shows them on a direct course back to port for the last 72 hours. But the secondary, internal navigation log, the one that tracks the ship's moment-to-moment movements for the autopilot, tells a different story. What does it say? Rossi asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. It shows that 2 nights before they docked, at approximately 2,300 hours, the ship went dead in the water. For 3 full hours. It was a complete stop in a sector of the Cascadia Basin that's known for its deep trenches. Then, at 0200 hours, it resumed its course to port. But here's the kicker. The VMS, the official tracker, never registered the stop. It shows them continuing on their course without interruption. The only way that's possible is if someone manually overrode the VMS data feed, feeding it a fake, pre-programmed course while the ship was actually stopped. It's an old smuggler's trick. And to do it, you'd need the highest level access codes on the bridge. You'd have to be the captain. Or his first mate. This was the bombshell. Eli Vance hadn't just been searching for how to bypass a VMS. He had actually done it. The timeline snapped into brutal focus. The ship had stopped. Why? To do a final, pinpoint sonar scan? To use a submersible drone to get eyes on the wreck? Whatever the reason, something had happened during those 3 missing hours. Something that had ended with Alistair Graves dead. Rossi and Thorne now had a theory. The crew hadn't just found the Santa Cruz. They had stopped directly over it. The treasure was no longer a sonar ghost. It was a tangible reality beneath their keel. And in that moment, with billions of dollars hanging in the balance just a few thousand feet below, a quiet, simmering mutiny had finally boiled over. The rival company, the crew's tension sit, was all background noise. The heart of the crime had occurred during those 3 digitally erased hours, when the Neptune's Folly was a ghost ship, invisible to the world, alone with its crew and the immense, corrupting weight of its discovery. They still didn't have the murder weapon, and they still didn't have a confession. But they now had a timeline for the murder that was completely different from the one Eli Vance had given them. He hadn't just found the body at 0600 in the port. The murder had almost certainly happened at sea, during that 3-hour stop. The story he had told them was a carefully constructed lie, designed to hide the real time and place of the crime. He's been playing us from the very beginning, Rossi said, her voice a mixture of anger and admiration. He didn't just kill him, he created a whole new stage for the crime. Well, Thorne said, a grim smile on his face as he put on his coat. It's time to tear down the set. The final act of the investigation was set. Armed with the knowledge of the ghost stop and the tampered VMS log, Rossi and Thorne knew they had the leverage to shatter the fragile alliance of the crew. The lie about the time of the murder was the key. Eli Vance had anchored his entire story to the discovery of the body at 0600 hours in port. By proving the murder had happened 2 nights earlier at sea, they could unravel his entire narrative and expose him as a manipulator, not a witness. They decided to break the crew apart, starting with the one they believed was the most likely to crack under pressure. Jenna O'Malley. She was ambitious and brilliant, but Rossi sensed she was not a cold-blooded killer. She was an accomplice, either through coercion or temptation, and her conscience was likely her weakest point. They brought her into the precinct, into a formal interrogation room. They didn't start with accusations. They started with the truth. We know about the stop, Jenna, Rossi began, her voice calm and even. She laid a printout of the comparative navigation logs on the table. We know the ship went dead in the water for 3 hours over the Cascadia Basin. We know the VMS was tampered with to hide it. We know the murder didn't happen in port. It happened out there, in the dark. Jenna stared at the logs, and all the color drained from her face. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled, her scientific mind unable to refute the hard data in front of her. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted any of this. The story she told was a tragic tale of ambition corrupted by proximity to overwhelming greed. They had found it. During the ghost stop, they had sent down a remote submersible with a high-definition camera. The images that had come back were breathtaking. The wreck of the Santa Cruz, its ancient timbers miraculously preserved in the cold anoxic depths. And through a breach in the hull, they had seen it. Chests, overflowing with the unmistakable glint of gold coins and the dull shine of silver ingots. It was real, Jenna wept. It was all real, and it broke something in all of us. Alistair, he was going to log it officially. He wanted the fame, the place in the history books. He said our shares would be substantial. But Eli had been working on Mike for weeks. He'd shown him the black market prices for artifacts like that. He told him that an unofficial recovery, a salvage fee before the authorities ever saw it, would make them all 10 times richer. Kings. According to Jenna, the argument had started on the bridge. Eli and Mike had confronted the captain. Graves, a man of unbending principle when it suited him, had refused. He had called them mutineers and thieves and had threatened to have them thrown in the brig. Mike grabbed him, Jenna said, her voice barely a whisper. He's so strong. He just held the captain. And Eli just stood there for a moment. He looked at the sonar screen, at the image of the gold, and then he looked at the captain. And he picked up Alistair's prized knife, the one he was so proud of. And he did it. It was so fast. Jenna's role had been one of terrified compliance. Eli, knowing she was the only one who could manipulate the sophisticated sonar and navigation logs, had ordered her to wipe the specific files related to the stop and the wreck's location. He had created the lie about the portside murder and had threatened her into silence. With Jenna's confession secured, they moved on to Mike Torres. Faced with Jenna's signed statement, the big diver folded in minutes, his only concern cutting a deal to save himself from a life sentence. He confirmed every detail, adding that the missing murder weapon had been weighted and dropped overboard into the trench, sent to the bottom of the sea to lie with the very treasure that had prompted its use. The final confrontation was with Eli Vance. He walked into the interrogation room with the same confident air he'd had from the beginning, unaware that his entire conspiracy had been dismantled. Thorne began, his voice heavy with contempt. Your story about finding the body at 0600 was a good one, Eli. Real convincing. But you made one mistake. You left a digital echo. We know about the stop. Rossi laid Jenna's signed confession on the table. She told us everything, Eli. The argument, the mutiny, the murder at sea. Your performance, as the grieving first mate is over. Eli Vance stared at Jenna's signature on the bottom of the page. He read the first few lines of her statement. And then, something in him seemed to break. The confident leader, the brilliant sailor, the meticulous planner, it all fell away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man consumed by a single, catastrophic miscalculation. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply began to talk, his voice a flat, dead monotone, the confession of a man recounting not a crime of passion, but a failed business transaction. He was a fool, Eli said, his voice devoid of emotion. A man of his genius, and he couldn't see the reality in front of him. That treasure wasn't a piece of history. It was a winning lottery ticket. And he was going to hand it over to the government and the insurance companies and let them give us the scraps. He called us mutineers. But he was the one betraying the spirit of the venture. We took the risk. We deserved the reward. He described the murder with a chilling detachment, almost as if he were describing how to fix a faulty engine. He admitted to planning the VMS override weeks in advance, a contingency in case the captain proved unreasonable. He showed no remorse, only a bitter resentment that his perfect plan had been undone by the sentimentality of his co-conspirator and the unseen persistence of the detectives. I would have gotten away with it, he said, the first spark of emotion showing in his eyes a flash of pure, arrogant pride. I would have been the man who found the Santa Cruz. The money, the fame, it would have all been mine. His. With the confession recorded, the final act played out with grim efficiency. A Coast Guard cutter, guided by the coordinates Jenna O'Malley provided, was dispatched to the Cascadia Basin. They located the wreck of the Santa Cruz, and a deep-sea submersible confirmed the existence of the treasure, a hoard even greater than the legends had suggested. The irony was devastating. The immense wealth that Eli Vance had killed for was recovered, but it would now be the property of the state, destined for a museum. Eli Vance, Mike Torres, and General Malley were all convicted. Eli, as the mastermind and murderer, received a sentence of life in prison without parole. The others received lesser, but still substantial sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. Months later, detectives Rossi and Thorne stood on the docks, looking out at the vast, gray expanse of the Pacific. The Neptune's Folly had been sold for scrap, its legendary career ending in a bloody, ignominious chapter. All that, Thorne said, shaking his head. All that planning, that betrayal, that violence. For a pile of gold he never even got to touch. It was never about the gold, Rossi said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Not really. It was about the idea of it. He killed his captain not for what was in those chests, but for what he thought it would make him. And in the end, it just made him a murderer, trapped in a cell while the real treasure sits at the bottom of the sea, just as it has for centuries. The ocean kept its secrets well, but it could not hide the greed of men. The case of the Neptune's Folly was closed, another dark story swallowed by the endless, indifferent sea.